Okay, still working with Chapter 15, Job Order Costing, tracking the costs of jobs as I complete them. And those costs in every single job are the direct materials used by the job, the direct labor that was spent on the job, and then an appropriate amount of factory overhead. So since we've done the homework problems already, I thought I'm just going to go through an entire a month of activity, and I'm just going to make it up as I go. So I thought maybe if you just sit back and watch where some of these numbers are coming from, hopefully at this point in time you're getting familiar with the flows of the costs from raw materials into work in process, where we add direct labor and factory overhead to convert those raw materials into a finished product, which sits on the shelf in finished goods until we sell it and gets transferred to cost of goods sold. So in job order costing, we are tracking the cost of individual jobs, and those individual jobs are tracked on job cost sheets. And we have one for every single job. So I'm going to make up the numbers as we go, because in the real world, we really don't know what the amounts are going to be or what the numbers are going to be. So I'm going to start with beginning balances. It's January 1st of the current year, January 1st, and I have $15,000 of raw materials. That's the cost of materials that are sitting in that quiet raw materials inventory room that have not been used yet. They haven't been assigned to any particular job. So they were bought last year. They were bought in November or December and are just sitting there. So they're an asset. They're mine. Work in process. I have one job that I started back in December, and that's job A. And back in December, I had put $3,000 of materials, I had labor of $5,000, and I had $15,000 of factory overhead from December. That this job has already cost a total of $23,000. So right now, this job cost is at, well, I'm going to put it right down here, $23,000. And those costs were all costs incurred in December, but because the job's not done yet, that job is still sitting here in work in process. So again, the work in process account is a control account, and it has the total cost of all jobs in process, which is only one right now, $23,000. Again, the job cost sheets are just the detail of the work in process account. Excuse me. I have, maybe I'll do this. I'll call this job A5. And in finished goods, there's two jobs that are sitting here that I finished last December, or maybe even prior to that, but they were finished by December 31st. Therefore, they're not still in process. They're done. Total cost of $40,000 for job A4. And, I'll say $50,000, a little bit better job for A3. So they are currently, the finished goods inventory has two jobs they're ready to sell that cost $90,000. Of course, they had job cost sheets when they were being worked on, and when they were all done, their costs added up to those amounts. And we transferred that cost to finished goods. So that's where we're starting for the year. We've closed out our sales, and we've closed out our cost of goods sold. We reset those to zero, as you recall, at the beginning of the year, so I can track the sales and cost of goods sold for the current year. And I have some items in inventory. Again, $15,000 of raw materials that haven't been used yet. There's one job in process that cost $23,000, and there's the detail of it, job A5. In finished goods, I've got two jobs that were done in the prior year and are just waiting to be sold. So I think there's about 10 different entries that we want to track that the book talks about, and that's these entries that we've seen them all already, but we're going to go through them one at a time. First thing I want to know is, during January, How much raw materials did I buy? What did I actually purchase for raw materials? So I'm going to go to the invoices, the purchase invoices that represent all the raw materials I purchased this month, and I'm going to I'm going to assume that we purchased, let's say, $110,000 of raw materials. Records show that we purchased $110,000 of raw materials. How do I record that? Well, it's recorded like this. We're going to debit raw materials. Allow me to abbreviate just to keep it simple. We're going to debit raw materials for $110,000, and we're going to credit probably accounts payable. $110,000. Now, when I post that, we're going to post the debit to raw materials for $110,000, and isn't that what we did? We added $110,000 to raw materials, and I don't have the accounts payable here, but over in the accounts payable, over in the liability section, I'm going to credit accounts payable. That's going to increase accounts payable. Now, because what we're focusing in on is the product costs, eventually we're going to actually pay this $110,000. And the text doesn't go this far, but when we do, when we write a check for $110,000, we'll debit accounts payable to take it to zero, and we'll credit cash. But that's an entry that's kind of outside the whole costing arena. But that's the first entry to record the purchase of raw materials. Now, second entry, I want to know what materials were actually taken out of, what materials were actually removed. So I need to get the documentation, the documents that are prepared when anybody goes and gets raw materials, and those are called material requisition slips. Material requisitions, they're requisitioning materials. So I'm going to go get them. Maybe what we do is the guy who manages the raw materials inventory, he just hangs on to them for the month, and at the end of the month, then he sends them up to me. So he summarizes them and sends them up to me, and here's what I see when he sends them up to me. He gives me a summary of what was used, and he says, here's the material requisition slips, and he says a total of $95,000 was taken out of raw materials. $15,000 went to job A5, $25,000 to job A6, $30,000 to A7, $10,000 to A8, and $15,000 for general factory overhead use. So recognize, these are direct materials. That's materials that came out of raw materials, went directly to jobs, and then $15,000 of materials were taken that are indirect materials. Either they were so small that I didn't want to trace how much thread went to each job or how much glue went to each job, or they were materials that weren't actually used on jobs, like, I don't know, toilet paper or paper towels. Those are supplies that are sitting in raw materials, and they're being consumed. So the authors break this down to two entries. I can see that because we had a job A5 already here, but I can see, looks like we started 3 new jobs because we went and got materials for 3 new jobs. So let's do this. Let's first record the direct materials being used, and they total up to 15 and 25 is 40, and 40 is 80. That's a total of $80,000. So now the direct materials being used, I want to debit work in process for the $80,000 of materials being used and credit raw materials. That's the journal entry. Debit work in process, credit raw materials. I'm going to post that. I'm going to post this debit to work in process, $80,000, and the credit, this is the second entry, credit to raw materials. And because I've added to the work in process account, I need to add them down here. This job, the total cost is going to change on this job. So now let me add them. Let me add that $80,000 to the jobs that were actually where this 80,000 went. Well, 15,000, if we can see that, 15,000 went to A5, so let me add that here, 15. 25,000 went to A6. 30,000 went to A7, and 10,000 went to A8. So I've added 80,000 to the work in process. I added 80,000 to the detail. That's the journal entry to record the requisitioning of raw materials as direct materials, directly to jobs. Let's do the third entry, which records this. That's factory overhead, the 15,000 that was taken out of raw materials and used for general factory operations. Well, all indirect factory costs are, do you remember what it is? Factory overhead. So in the third entry, we're going to debit factory overhead. We're adding to factory overhead 15,000 and taking it out of raw materials. Let me post that. We're debiting 15,000 to represent materials used by the factory and taking it out of here. 15,000. So this 80,000 is the direct materials. This 15,000 is the indirect materials. So that's why the material requisition slips show that we use 95,000 or 95,000 of materials was requisitioned out of here, and here's where it went. Cool. Now the book, I mean, this is like the 7th or 8th entry that it discusses. These entries aren't, you know, there's really no specific rhyme and reason to them. I suppose you have to buy materials before you can use them, but generally I would think that these are both recorded at the same time, because you go and find out what was taken out of raw materials and record both entries. You could have actually done it in one entry too. We could have debited work in process for 80, debited factory overhead for 15, and credited raw materials for 95 for the total amount. But I think the authors felt that it was a little bit easier to understand it if we broke it down into exactly what was coming out of there, which is cool. That's fine. Okay, so that's the materials that were used. What about direct labor? Let me go get the time cards. Let me break it all down and see how much we paid our employees and how they spent their time, and if we can track any of their time to jobs. So I went and got the time cards and analyzed them, and here's what I came up with. We said that labor for the month of January was a total of $128,000. And our analysis shows that of that $128,000 total labor, $15,000 of it was spent specifically on job A5, $35,000 on A6, $30,000 on A7, $8,000 on A8, and $40,000 for indirect labor, such as the janitors and the supervisors and security guards and things like that. So now, the authors like to break it down. They record the direct labor and then the indirect labor. So let's start with this. This is the direct labor, these guys right here, and that adds up to the $88,000. That cost that can be directly traced to working on specific jobs. Let's record that entry. And how do we record that? Well, because that's direct labor, we're going to charge it directly to work in process. So we're going to debit work in process for $88,000. I'll post that right now. And what are we going to credit? Well, we're going to credit cash if I had already paid it, but I think the authors like factory labor payable, something like that, and then we'll pay it later. And really, the credit isn't what we're concentrating on. It's the debit. It's the work, charging the jobs. Now, because I added 88,000 to the work in process, I need to add the 88,000 to the jobs. Let's do that. Of this 88,000, 15,000 was for A5, 35,000 was for A6, 30,000 was for A7, and 8,000 were for A8. So I added 88,000 to the control account, and I've added 88,000 to the job cost sheets. If I were to add up all of these costs, they'll add up to the same as these. They've got to. So that's how I record the direct labor. How about the indirect labor, this 40,000 of indirect labor? And what is that indirect labor? That's another factory overhead. So let's record the indirect labor. That gets charged to factory overhead, 40,000, and credit, the same thing here. It's still labor payable, 40,000. And of course, I don't have the credit here for the factory labor payable. I don't have that account here because that's not where we're really concentrating. But good. Now we've recorded the labor, both direct and indirect. Now, remember what we debit to factory overhead is the actual overhead costs. And this was the actual indirect supplies used and the actual indirect labor. What we pull out is what were applied to work in process. It's the end of the month, and I want to now charge these jobs with factory overhead. Well, I'll tell you what, before we do that, let's record the rest of the overhead for the month because this will be done at the end of the month. But during the month, I want to know, this was for indirect costs, this was the indirect materials, and this was the indirect labor. Are there any other indirect costs of the factory? Oh, yeah, there's a bunch of them. So let me get a listing of what those are. And all the other factory overhead expenses are really represented by two things. One is depreciation expense, depreciation of equipment, 50,000, and then all kinds of accounts payables. This is the utilities and the phone and the supplies and so many other things that I had to pay for, repairs and maintenance, and they're just accounts payables. These are all invoices that came in that I'm going to pay. So how much is that? How much was the rest of the factory overhead over and above indirect materials and indirect labor? They amount to $212,000. So let me record those. I need to add that $212,000 to factory overhead. And what am I going to credit? Well, I'm going to credit accounts payable for the 162. Got to pay for that. What do I credit for the depreciation? Now remember, that's just the amount of the equipment and building and fixed assets that I'm using that has burned away this month, that I've actually burned up, depreciated. That gets credited to accumulated depreciation, which is a contra asset account. Again, the credits aren't really what we're concerned with in our scenario here. It's the debit. So we had total factory overhead of other factory overhead of 212. So gosh, the total indirect costs were, for this month of January, were $267,000. Those are all the indirect costs of running this factory. The direct costs are direct materials and direct labor. They're already in work in process. We're now going to send this up to work in process, but we need to know how much. How much? Now recall the way we know how much to apply to work in process. We're going to apply this. We just don't send it all. We do it based on a ratio, a predetermined rate for the year. So let's go back now to the beginning of the year, even before January 1st or January 31st, right at the end of December. This is January 1st and this is 12/31. This is the year we're in right now, and we are working with January. Working in January. Well, even before the year started in December, we came up with a predetermined overhead rate and we wanted to tie overhead to labor somehow. We wanted to just, what is overhead? What do we think overhead for the coming year is going to be compared to total labor? So we're just going to estimate what I think factory overhead is going to be. And this is all being done right now. We have no idea what we don't know what it's actually going to be, but we have a pretty good idea of what it's going to be. What do we think overhead is going to be for the year? Estimated factory overhead for the entire year. We think it's going to be about, let's see here. We think it's going to be about $3,300,000. That's what we think it's going to be. I mean, this month it was 267. So yeah, that's about right. Yeah, but we didn't know what it was going to be yet. Estimated factory overhead for the year is $3.3 million. And I want to know, how does that compare to direct labor? What do I think direct labor is going to be? And we think estimated direct labor cost, we think direct labor is going to be, let me make sure I've got that this is going to work out right without coming out with some really kind of funky decimals. Okay, we think direct labor is going to be about 1.1 million. We think it's going to be about 1.1 million. So if you do the math on this, and here I'll even do it for you. 123 divided by 123 equals 3. Then you need to move the decimal place 2 places to the right, so multiply it times 100. Oh, 300%. Now step back. 300%. 3 times as much. Does it look like overhead is going to be 3 times as much as labor? Yes, it does. So as jobs get finished, I will look at the labor in the job, how much labor was that was incurred, and I will charge 3 times or 300% of that amount as factory overhead. So how much labor was actually incurred? $88,000. Direct labor was $88,000 times 300%. That is, so I want to charge jobs $264,000. Again, direct labor this month was $88,000. I want to add 3 times that much based on our predetermined rate, and we're going to use this rate all year long. 300% of that number is $264,000. So I am going to apply factory overhead. I'm going to debit work in process for the $264,000 and credit factory overhead, $264,000. Let's post that. There we go. We've charged it. We've applied factory overhead. Now we've splashed factory overhead to all the jobs based on the predetermined rate. And because I've added $264,000, and notice that is 3 times that amount, I need to take that $264 and add it to all these jobs. And we do that by this $88,000 direct labor. That's these guys right here. That's this, and this. We're going to charge each job 300% of that. So the first job, A5, had 15,000, so it's getting charged 45,000, 3 times as much of it, of its direct labor. This job had 35,000, so it's going to get charged 3 times that much. What is that, 105,000? This job had 30,000, so we're going to charge it 90, 3 times as much. Finally, 8,024. Let me make sure these add up. 45 plus the 105 plus the 90 plus the 24. 264,000. Good, it works. I just put the total here and the detail here. Cool. Okay. Let's do a quick check, and let's make sure that the 4 job cost sheets do add up to the total of work in process. I'm adding these. This adds up to $455,000, and that's what these guys should add up to. The first one, this is job A5, cost $98,000. Job A6 cost $165,000, bigger job. A7 is 60 and 90 is 150. Finally, 10, 8, and 24. This adds up to 42,000. I sure hope these 4 add up to that. And if they don't, it just means I made a mistake somewhere. And it certainly could happen because I'm doing this cold. That way it's kind of fun for me too. 455,000. Awesome! Okay. So now, what do we know? Well, there's 455,000. I wonder if any of these jobs are done yet. So I go talk to the supervisor, go out to the work in process, and I say, hey, Joe, are any of these jobs done yet? And he says, yeah, A5's done and A6 are done. We're still working on A7 and A8. Okay. Well, if these jobs are done, do their costs belong in work in process? The answer is no. Where do their costs need to go? Finished goods. So I need to make an entry. These 2 costs represent cost of goods manufactured. That's the cost of goods that I got done this month. They add up to $263,000, these 2 jobs. So I need to make an entry to transfer that 263 to finished goods. That is cost of goods manufactured. Now, we don't have an account called cost of goods manufactured, but that's what that number is. So in order to do that, I'm going to need to make the entry. Debit finished goods for $263,000 and credit work in process for $263,000. Nice. What does that leave this balance at? If it was 455, and I'm going to transfer out 263, it leaves a balance in ending inventory of 192. What does that represent? The 2 jobs that are still here. And of course, that's where I'll start next month, with these 2 jobs. Now it begs the question, what have any of these been sold? And they may say, yeah, we sold that, and of this 263, which are these 2 jobs, I sold the 98. So I'm going to maybe I should have done this. Said it was 98 and 165. Doesn't really matter. I mean, it's still that same amount, and that's been sold. They've been sold. How much did you sell them for? Well, we sold them for $400,000. Cool. Okay. Well, let's record the sale. Sales, 400,000. And did we get cash or do we sell them on credit? Nah, we don't give credit. We sell them for cash. Sweet. Cash. 400,000. So we record the sale, and then we transfer their cost, the cost of the 3 that were sold. These 3 add up to $198,000. I need to transfer, no, $188,000. I need to transfer their 3 costs to cost of goods sold. Here's the 10th entry. Debit cost of goods sold for $188. Take it out of finished goods. It's coming out of finished goods, $188. Oh, you can't even see that. I'm sorry. There's the entry to record the sale. There's the entry to record the cost of goods sold. We posted the sale. Now let's post the debit to 188. That's entry number 10. This was entry number 9. 188. This was the 8th entry. Yeah, this was the 7th entry. Kind of lost my numerals there. Where does that leave this account now? This account balance, it was 90. He added 98 and 165 for the 2 jobs that were finished, and then we took out 188. That leaves a balance here of 165,000. What does that represent? Well, remember, this is sold, this is sold, this is sold. It represents this one job, which is this one job that hasn't been sold yet. So this 165 is this one job that hasn't been sold. I put a red X through it so I know it's not still in work in process. This job is totally gone. The 192,000 in work in process is represented by these 2 jobs, A7 and A8. How much raw materials do I still have? Well, let me see, 15 plus the 110 I bought minus the 95 that I used. It has an ending balance on 131 of 30,000. So I know the ending balances now of my inventory accounts. Gross profit here is 212,000. But don't forget we've got all our period costs over here before we see if we really made any money. Factory overhead for this month, we incurred actual 267. I applied 264. I'm off by, let's see, I was off by $3,000. Not bad. Not bad considering I'm not going to wait till the end of the year to find out how much overhead I actually need to charge out and how much labor I'm going to charge it out over. I'm going to work with my estimates, which are pretty good estimates. Companies know about how much their overhead's going to be, and they know about how much their labor costs are. And based using that estimate of a percentage, I was off by $3,000. Am I under or over applied? Think about it. Am I under or over applied? I am under applied. Had I had perfect information, I would have charged $267. But I didn't charge quite enough. But that's okay. This is just 1 month out of 12. We're going to let it ride. Now, if for some reason we do clear this out at the end of the month, or if we get to the end of the year and this is still sitting here, we just clean this up at the end of a year. And we simply just transfer whatever balance it has to cost of goods sold. So in this case, would I need to debit or credit the factory overhead to get it back to 0? I would credit it. So we'll debit it over to cost of goods sold just to get it to 0. We do that at the end of the year. So that's an example showing all 10 entries that this chapter 15 has talked about. The entries to record the purchase of raw materials, the usage of direct materials, the usage of direct labor, the usage of indirect materials, the usage of or the incurrence of indirect labor, the incurrence of all the other factory overhead expenses, the application of factory overhead to work in process based on a predetermined rate, the reflection of jobs that were completed, transferring them to finished goods, and then the sale, which is 2 entries. Record the sale and then transfer its cost out of finished goods to cost of goods sold. That's the chapter. So hopefully that helped. That was only about 35 minutes. And so follow that example through again. Or just kind of watch this and you can see these are the flows of the costs and where they're parked and how they move through and ultimately end up in cost of goods sold. So, all right, well, hopefully that'll help. I'll probably load another 1 or 2 videos showing additional examples the more you see it, the more it's going to make sense. I guarantee you. So anyway, hope you're having a great week, and we'll catch up with you on the next video.